Welcome to Occult Archives, where we uncover the mysteries, myths, and legends behind history's most feared books. From mystical grimoires to ancient religious texts, these books carry secrets too dangerous to be read. Are you ready to turn the pages of the unknown? This is Season 1, Episode 16, Malleus Maleficarum, The Witch Hunter's Bible. Let's dive in.
All right, so Chris, we are diving into some really dark waters this time.
No kidding. This is a big one. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches. This book is like the ultimate guide to witch hunting. It was huge during the witch craze in Europe.
And even today, it's a pretty chilling read.
Yeah, it's definitely not light reading. But, we got to face this stuff head on. We need to understand it. So for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at historical excerpts from this book to try to figure out what it actually said. What did it say about witches? What did it claim they did? And maybe the most disturbing part. How did it say they should be dealt with?
Yeah. I mean, it's important to remember the historical context here. This was a time of intense fear and paranoia about witchcraft. And this book fed right into that.
Big time. So let's start with one of the core arguments of the Malleus Maleficarum, and that is that witchcraft isn't just some kind of folk magic. It's actually linked to heresy.
Right. And that's a really important point because heresy is basically about holding beliefs that go against the official teachings of the church. So how does the Malleus connect witchcraft to that? Well, it says that by practicing witchcraft, you're essentially rejecting the Catholic faith, or at least denying some of its key doctrines.
So it's not just about casting spells or making potions, it's about a deeper rejection of religious authority.
Exactly. And that becomes even clearer when the Malleus describes the rituals involved in becoming a witch. I mean, renouncing your faith, offering children to Satan, that's pretty serious stuff.
Yeah, that's not just dabbling in magic anymore, that's full-on spiritual rebellion. Now, speaking of the devil, the Malleus really puts him front and center as the driving force behind witchcraft.
Oh, absolutely. The devil's the mastermind. He's the one who gives witches their power, and he's actively involved in their evil deeds. It's not just temptation. He's directly manipulating them.
And he's not just messing with people's souls either. He's causing real physical harm. Sickness, disease, even impotence.
That's right. The Malleus talks about how the devil can affect the venereal act in all sorts of ways. It's pretty specific, actually. Like Peter Pilides, this guy, he came up with 5 different ways the devil could cause impotence.
5 ways, huh? That's pretty detailed. I guess they were really worried about that sort of thing back then.
Well, yeah. I mean, impotence was seen as a threat to procreation and to society as a whole. So if the devil could cause that, that was a big deal.
Right. And this raises a really interesting question. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why would he allow the devil to have this much power?
That's the classic problem of evil, right?
Hmm.
And the Malleus tries to address this by saying that God does permit the devil's actions, but it's for a greater purpose.
So even the bad stuff is part of God's plan.
That's the idea. And they even use the example of Job from the Bible. You know how Job was tested by God and all these terrible things happened to him? Well, the Malleus says that God allows the devil to afflict people like that, but usually it's because they've sinned in some way.
So basically, if you're good, God might protect you from the devil, but if you're bad, well, you're fair game.
Yeah, that's kind of the logic there. And the Malleus also says that devils aren't working alone. They're all in cahoots with each other. They've got this whole demonic hierarchy working together to bring down justice.
It's like a big evil conspiracy.
Exactly. And then there's the whole thing about incubi and succubi. These are devils who can actually take on physical forms to interact with humans.
Yeah, that's where things get really weird. The idea of a devil having sex with a person, I mean, that's just creepy.
It is really disturbing. And the Malleus says that they do this not for pleasure because they're spiritual beings, but to cause harm, to corrupt people, and maybe even to influence the children born from these unholy unions.
So it's all part of this grand scheme to spread evil and corrupt humanity. And they specifically mention that the devil has a strong influence over men's privy parts.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme in the Malleus. They seem really obsessed with sexuality and the idea that the devil can use it to control people.
Right. And this leads us to one of the most disturbing aspects of the Malleus. Its whole section on why women are more likely to become witches.
This is where the book's misogyny really comes out. It's basically a list of all the reasons why women are supposedly weaker and more susceptible to the devil's influence.
So what are some of these reasons?
Well, they say women are more credulous, meaning they're more easily deceived. They're more impressionable, more likely to be swayed by emotions. They have weaker intellects and stronger carnal desires.
So basically, they're saying women are just not as smart or as strong as men, and that makes them easy targets for the devil.
Exactly. And they also accuse women of having unruly tongues, meaning they gossip and spread rumors.
Right. And they're vengeful, they hold grudges, and of course, they're jealous of each other.
It's all just a bunch of stereotypes and prejudices used to justify the persecution of women. And to make it seem like it's coming from a place of authority, they even quote the Bible and classical writers like Seneca.
Yeah. They try to give it a veneer of intellectual respectability, but it's just plain old sexism.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about how the Malleus describes the initiation process for becoming a witch. What are the steps involved?
Well, first you have to renounce your faith. Make a formal rejection of the Catholic Church and all its teachings.
That's a pretty big step.
It is. And then you have to dedicate yourself to evil, body and soul.
Wow. So there's no going back at this point.
Not according to the Malleus.
Mm.
And then comes the really horrifying part. You have to offer up an unbaptized child to Satan.
That's just sick.
It is. It's one of the most disturbing accusations leveled against witches. And then finally, you have to engage in carnal lust with incubi or succubi.
So basically, it's all about turning your back on God and embracing evil in every way possible.
Right. And the Malleus even compares this to earlier beliefs about incubi, where women were seen as unwilling victims. They say that now women are choosing this. They're willingly entering into this servitude.
It's like they're saying women are inherently evil and they want to be witches.
That's the message they're sending. And they try to back this up with stories and statistics. Like they mentioned that 48 witches were burned in just 5 years in Constance and Ratisbon.
So they're trying to create this sense of urgency and danger. Like witchcraft is a real and present threat that needs to be dealt with harshly.
Exactly. And they say that all magic, even things like sorcery and astrology, come from the devil. But witchcraft is the worst because it involves a direct pact with him.
So it's like the ultimate betrayal of God. And they also claim that witches can use their powers to corrupt the sacraments of the church.
That's right. Things like baptism, communion, even exorcism. They say witches can twist these sacred rituals and use them for evil purposes.
That would have been seen as a huge threat to the church's authority.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole thing about witches being able to fly, or at least to transport themselves supernaturally.
Yeah, that's one of the classic images of a witch, right? Soaring through the night on a broomstick.
Right. And the Malleus says that they can do this either physically or spiritually, like
Yeah.
maybe they're actually flying or maybe it's just an illusion.
Either way, it would have been pretty freaky to witness.
No kidding.
Huh.
And they also talk about how witches can cause men to become impotent or even make it seem like their penises have disappeared.
That's getting pretty specific.
Yeah, well, the Malleus goes into a lot of detail about the supposed powers of witches and how they can use them to harm people. And they also talk about how witches can transform men into beasts.
Like werewolves.
Yeah, or other animals too. But they often present this as an illusion, like maybe the man hasn't actually changed, but it just looks that way because of the witch's magic.
So it's all about messing with people's perceptions.
Exactly. And one of the most disturbing things they talk about is how witch midwives will kill babies and offer them to the devil.
That's just horrifying.
It is. And they even tell a story about a witch midwife who did this to a woman at a tavern. It's supposed to be proof that these things really happen.
So basically, they're painting this picture of witches as these monstrous, baby-killing devil worshippers.
Yeah, it's a very dehumanizing portrayal. And it's meant to justify the extreme measures they advocate for dealing with witches.
Right. So let's talk about that. What does the Malleus say about how to identify and punish witches?
Well, first of all, they say that if you suspect someone of being a witch, you can torture them to get a confession.
Torture.
Yeah. And they also recommend shaving the accused's body to look for devil's marks. These are supposed to be spots where the devil has touched them and they're insensitive to pain.
Wow.
That's pretty brutal.
It is. And they also talk about this process called canonical purgation, where if someone is suspected of witchcraft, but there's no solid proof, they have to go through this ritual to clear their name.
So even if you're innocent, you could still end up being accused and having to prove yourself. That's right. And one of the ways they say you can test a witch is by lifting them off the ground. The idea is that witches get their power from the earth, so if you lift them up, they'll lose their strength and be more likely to confess.
That's just crazy.
It is, but that's the kind of logic they were using back then. And if a witch does confess but then relapses back into heresy, they say they should be put to death.
No second chances, huh?
Nope. And they also talk about whether witchcraft can be cured. And they basically say that only God can truly cure it. It's a miracle.
So there's no magic potion or spell that can undo witchcraft?
Not according to the Malleus. They say confession can help, but ultimately it's up to God. And they even warn people not to go to other witches for help because that will just make things worse.
Yeah, that makes sense. You wouldn't go to a drug dealer to get off drugs, would you?
I guess not. And they also talk about how devils can disguise themselves as innocent people to frame them for witchcraft.
So you could be accused even if you haven't done anything wrong.
Right. And they say that the only way to protect yourself from this is to be truly devout and live a life of grace.
So basically, the more holy you are, the less likely you are to be bewitched.
That's the idea. And they recommend using things like holy water and blessed salt to ward off evil.
So like spiritual weapons.
Exactly. And they also say that certain prayers and blessings can help, but they warn against using any kind of magic or incantations because that could attract devils.
That's a fine line, isn't it?
It is. And they also talk about how to perform exorcisms. They say you should focus on exorcising the person, not the demon itself. And you should even exorcise the person's food and drink.
Wow, they really thought the devil could get into everything.
They did. And finally, they talk about the legal process for dealing with witches. They say that both the church and the secular authorities have a role to play.
So it's a joint effort.
Right. And they say that if a cleric is found guilty of witchcraft, they should be stripped of their position and then handed over to the secular authorities for punishment.
Makes sense.
And they also talk about the importance of considering the testimony of witnesses carefully, because some people might be motivated by malice.
So they're acknowledging that there could be false accusations.
They are. But they still maintain that witchcraft is a real and serious threat.
So basically, they're trying to strike a balance between being cautious and being zealous.
That's right. And they end the book with a call to action, urging all Christians to support the inquisitors in their fight against witchcraft.
So it's like a rallying cry.
It is. It's a very powerful and disturbing book.
Yeah. It's a chilling glimpse into a very dark chapter in human history.
And it's a reminder that fear and ignorance can lead to terrible things.
Absolutely. So what do you think? What's the takeaway message here?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the Malleus Maleficarum was written in a very specific historical context. It was a time of great upheaval and uncertainty, and people were looking for someone to blame for their problems.
And witches were an easy target.
Exactly. They were seen as outsiders, as threats to the social order. And the Malleus Maleficarum provided a justification for persecuting them.
But it's not just about witches. It's about how fear and prejudice can be used to control people.
That's right. And it's something we need to be aware of even today. Because even though we might think we're more enlightened than people in the past, the same dangers still exist.
Absolutely. We still see scapegoating and persecution happening all over the world. And it often starts with the spread of misinformation and fear.
Right. So I think the Malleus Maleficarum is a warning to us. It's a reminder that we need to be critical thinkers and to question what we're told.
Especially when it comes to things that seem too good to be true or too scary to ignore.
Exactly. Because history has shown us time and time again that when we let fear and prejudice guide our actions, it never ends well.
So let's keep our minds open and our hearts compassionate. And let's try to learn from the mistakes of the past so we don't repeat them in the future.
That's a great message to end on.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Malleus Maleficarum. It's been a dark and disturbing journey, but hopefully we've learned something from it.
I think we have.
And who knows, maybe we'll even sleep a little better tonight knowing that we've faced our fears head on.
Maybe. But I'm still keeping the holy water close by just in case.
Good idea. You can never be too careful. Until next time, keep exploring the shadows.
And stay curious.